All right. Last Sunday of the decade. Oh, we made it. You know, I started thinking about that the other day. I started noticing a lot of end of the year, people putting out lists of their favorite things or their most memorable things that happened in the year. And then I started seeing things coming up about the decades of, the teens or whatever we're calling it. And then I started thinking, man, a decade. Whew, we made it through another 10 years. We're about to get into the roaring 20s again. So I guess we're ready to go with that and get ready to go. And then I started thinking about my kids and they're thinking, okay, well, maybe I'll have Ransom come on the podcast or something. I told him I wanted to get him on the podcast at least a little bit so that all of the people back in Oklahoma will be forced to listen to him because they're not forced to listen to me. I was like, we could talk about what happened last decade. And I was like, okay, he's 21 now, so that would be 11. Wow. And I was like, wow, that's a lot of change in life to be talking about. So let's talk about 11 years old, and hopefully some things have changed from 11 years old to now. But that time passes on, and I think it's very valuable for us to look back and see where we've come. We've been spending the last part of this year talking about the journey that God has for us, and I think it's important for us every once in a while to reflect on the journey that we're having. I mean, we've talked about how in scriptures, it's often in those journeys that God is delivering his word, sending a message, encouraging people, building up faith, doing some amazing things. And so when we're on our journey, if we never take the time to sit down and look back at the journey and say, all right, God, what is it that you've got me doing? Where do you have me going? What are the things that I should be taking away from it? Then we're missing a big part of what the journey is all about, that growth and that learning and that getting to new places. And so today, we're just going to be in one chapter of the Bible. We're going to be in the book of Ecclesiastes, all right? And if you're one of those people like, where in the world? If you just kind of open your Bible up in the middle, you'll hit Psalms. All right, and that's one of our writings. It's one of the poetry parts of the Bible. Psalms, right after that is Proverbs, and then Ecclesiastes. So you're going to find Ecclesiastes right there after all that big book of Psalms, which is usually pretty easy to find. Or you could just get the phone app out and pull it up, and it'll be in there ready to go on Ecclesiastes. Chapter 12. It's the last chapter of Ecclesiastes. And if you have never read through Ecclesiastes is about Solomon, the king, the wisest guy that ever lived. God said, hey, ask for one favor and I'll give it to you. And he said, give me wisdom. And God's like, I'll grant you that wisdom and everything that comes along with it. And Solomon spends his whole life trying to figure out the meaning of life. And I know that might be like a trite thing, but that's what a lot of people, philosophers and other people, clergy and religion and whomever, maybe even yourself, have spent some time saying, what's the meaning of life? And that's what we do at the end of the year, at the end of a decade, a lot of times, is we spend some time asking, what's the meaning of it all? How can I find value in it? Some of you know that I do some different weird things. There's a British author that wrote a book called Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, and they built a computer to figure out the meaning of life, and it was 42. And there's no reason or rhyme for it, but if you ever see 42 on my stuff, it's because of that book that I read a long, long time ago. But we are always looking, what's the meaning of life? And the guy was kind of a satirist, just trying to say it's preposterous to think that we could build a computer and figure it out. And that's what Solomon's trying to do, figure out the meaning of life. And he gets to the very end of his book and he has to kind of sum it up, has to give what he figured is the meaning of life. What is life really all about? And he starts with something that maybe for some of us will seem a little too close to home to have Solomon writing about this. So in Ecclesiastes chapter 12, verse 1, we're going to be talking about how the years never stop in that one. It says, don't let the excitement of youth cause you to forget about your Creator. The kids running around, Christmas time, new toys, lots of candy and sugar in there, and I'm sure that some of them were running around your house. But in that, he says, don't let the excitement of your youth, when you're young, when you're healthy, when you can do all those things that you want to do, don't let that cause you to forget your Creator. Honor Him in your youth before you grow old and say life is not pleasant anymore. All right? All right. If you're old out there, all right, this is the Bible, all right? It's not me. I just want you to go with me on this. But he says honor Him before you get to the point you're like, I just don't like life anymore. Remember Him before the light of the sun, moon, and the stars is dim to your old eyes, and rain clouds continually darken your skies. Remember Him before your legs, the guards of your house, start to tremble, and before your shoulders the strong men stoop. Remember Him before your teeth, your few remaining servants, stop grinding, and before your eyes the women looking through the windows see dimly. Remember Him before the door to life's opportunities is closed and the sound of work fades. Now you rise at the first chirping of the birds, but then all their sounds will grow faint. Remember Him before you become fearful of falling and worry about dangers in the streets, before your hair turns white like an almond tree in bloom and you drag along without energy like a dying grasshopper, and your caperberry no longer inspires sexual desires. And remember Him before you near the grave, your everlasting home, when the mourners will weep at your funeral. Yes, remember your Creator now while you are young, before the silver cord of life snaps and the golden bowl is broken. Don't wait until the water jar is smashed at the spring and the pulley is broken at the well, for then the dust will return to the earth and the spirit will return to God who gave it. I mean, you read that passage, it says, remember the times of your youth. Remember to do the things that you want to do in the times of your youth. Because in reality, as you start clocking those years, when you say it's another decade that's gone, most of us, if we look back a decade ago, we're probably going to say, a decade ago, I was feeling a little bit better. I didn't creak as much. We were in New York City this week to meet some friends from Oklahoma, and we did a lot of walking, which was great on that day that I did a lot of walking. And then the next day, I got out of the bed, and it was like, oh, and I couldn't straighten all the way up. And the passage actually tells us, watch out. One day you're going to come and your shoulders are not going to stand straight anymore, and your legs are going to be feeble and trembling. And that was my legs, and they wouldn't work. And I'm like, I can't move. I'm just going to stand here for a little bit. And they still kind of hurt a little bit. It's been like 3 or 4 days. They should be fine by now, but they still hurt. It's awful. 10 years ago, that wouldn't have happened. 10 years ago, I'd be like, okay, well, I walked some, they hurt a little bit. All right, wake up the next day ready to go. And as time passes on, we lose that ability to be able just to bounce back, to get up and do whatever we want to do. The kids nowadays, they're out there doing stuff all night long, and Kim and I are like, whoa, it's 8:30. We better shut in. And now that it's kind of winter time and it gets dark at 4 o'clock, there are times when Kim's like, well, I'm going to bed right now. And we're like, it's 5:30. And she's like, really? It feels like 10, I know it doesn't happen to the rest of you all, but it feels like 10 o'clock. I'm just going to go to bed anyways. I'm like, okay, and you get that way. But how many things in our life have we always told ourselves, you know what, I'll do that thing. I'll do that thing when I'm older. I'll do that thing when I'm wiser. I'll do that thing when I have more money. I'll do that thing when I've got more responsibility. How many things in our lives do we push off and say, I'll do that when? And then we have some sort of thing tagged on behind it. When. Young people come and they want to do marriage counseling or pre-marriage counseling, and they're like, when's the best time to get married? Like, the answer is, there's none. You're young and stupid. You have no money, all right? But that's everybody. If we waited till we were ready, we had a house, we had all the money we want, everything was perfect, the job was great, we had vacation time, all those things, no one would ever get married. There's no good time. People coming like, well, we want to start a family, but we're going to wait. How many people do I know that have tried to wait to start their family? Then all of a sudden they're in their 30s and they're like, well, we've got a career and other things going on. And then the doctors are saying, you know what, you're really past that age where it's a good idea to be having lots of... When's the best time? There's not a good time. you're not going to be ready. When you're the first-time parent and you're staring at that child and the doctor hands it to you and they're like, go home. And you're like, go home? Aren't you going to give me instructions? What do I do? You gave me a baby. We're not ready. I learned the other day, I got to keep John and Abby's baby for like 3 hours. That was it. They were like, we want to go out and have a meal or something. Would you watch the baby for 3 hours? Like, yeah, I love babies. Man, I've forgotten a lot about babies. 3 hours later, I'm like, take it back. I can't handle it anymore. I'm going to have to relearn some things about babies. It takes a while, but we're never in a good spot to say everything is perfect for me to then take my next step, because that's what the journey is about. Remember, we've been talking so much about the journey. The reason we look back on the decade is because as we begin to do the stuff that's out there, that's where we really learn the stuff. I mean, with our first baby, we had every book that could possibly be gotten. You know, all of our friends were having babies at the same time. They bought books, and they were like, hey, you can borrow our book. And we read lots of books about babies. You can read all the books you want to about baby, but until you're holding one that's screaming at you, and you're like, I've done everything I know, what happens? That book's not going to help you. You sometimes just have to go through that journey. You have to walk that walk. You find out what's going on in that baby's life, and then they find out what's going on in your life, and you grow and you work it together. In a marriage, in whatever, in a new job. Are you ready? No. No, I'm not ready. But how many times have we said, God, I'm going to get to the things that you want me to do when it's all put together. And we delay and we put off, and we delay and we put off. And Solomon writing, remember, he's trying to find the meaning of life. And at the very end of his book, before he tells you his ultimate findings, his conclusion about the meaning of life, he says, here's one thing about the meaning of life. I've spent my entire life looking for it, and now I'm old and tired, and I don't care about it anymore. You ever realize that? You could spend your whole life looking for meaning, but if you haven't done anything about it your whole life, if you spent your whole youth, your vigor, all your energy just searching for this meaning of life, by the time you think you find it, he was pointing out you won't have two teeth together to grind. All right? That just happens. Don't be laughing that hard, Ray. All right? Don't be laughing that hard. We spend all this time trying to find the meaning of life, and then we get to the point where we're like, okay, well, maybe I'm ready now. I'm older. I'm wiser. I'm richer. I'm more responsible. And then we forget the flip side of that. I'm tired. I'm worn out. I don't got much energy. Things make popping noises when I walk, and other people can hear it. You know, they always make noises. It's when other people are like, was that you? And you're trying to push it off on the chair. I think it was the chair. All right? At some point in time, people know that's you making those noises walking down the halls. And so we replace our list of what we say, when I'm older, I'll do it, with a list that says, I wish I had done it when I'm younger. I wish I had traveled more. I wish I had spent more time with my family. I wish I had invested more. I wish. And they look back, and we're spending all of our time saying, I wish. And so Solomon starts off by saying, hey, don't forget to serve God, to love God, to honor God now in the times of your youth. And whether you like it or not, this is your youth. Because next decade, when we do this sermon again, you're going to look back and say, man, I was such a young guy back then when I was in my 40s or 50s or 60s or whatever. This is the youngest you're going to be for the rest of the year. I promise you, all right? They're not bringing in new replacement parts. You don't get to start over again. This is the youngest you're going to be. This is your youth. And so ask yourself, what can I do? What is God calling me to be a part of? And so he goes on. He tells us, remember, if you've ever read Ecclesiastes, he's always saying, vanity, vanity. If you read the old King James Version, when you hear that term, vanity, vanity, or it's a term that means meaningless. And he's always looking for something new under the sun. He's always looking for, and so it might be popularity, it might be wealth, it might be so many different things that he's looking for, love, romance, whatever, to give him meaning to his life. And this is what he concludes in Ecclesiastes 12, verse 8. He said, everything is meaningless, says the teacher. Completely meaningless. Keep this in mind. The teacher was considered wise. We're talking about Solomon. He's calling himself the teacher here. The teacher was considered wise, and he taught the people everything he knew. He listened carefully to many proverbs, studying and classifying them. The teacher sought to find just the right words to express truths clearly. The words of the wise are like cattle prods, painful but helpful. Their collected sayings are like a nail-studded stick with which the shepherd drives the sheep. And he says everything's meaningless. He said, this is what I'm going to encourage you to do. Keep learning and keep teaching. What did he do? He learned something new every day. The teacher said, I read other people. I wanted to understand what people understood, and I wanted to be able to share it with other people in a way that people could then understand it. It's what he did in his life. He said, keep learning and keep teaching. You know how important that keep learning thing is? I mean, I've dealt with in my family. We've had some people that have had Alzheimer's, degenerative memory loss, and things like that. And when we talk to the doctors that are trying to help us with those situations, one of the things they always tell us is learn something new every day. Engage your mind. When your mind shuts down, when your mind turns off, that's when your mind starts putting stuff away and saying, oh, well, we don't need this stuff anymore. Always try to learn something. Yeah, but I'm old. I was like, that's okay. Learn something new. Do something new. Find something that's out. Teach somebody else, because that's a whole new learning experience in of itself. The more that you use it, the more that you exercise your mind, the more your mind's going to stay sharp. So keep learning something. Keep trying to figure something new. I don't know what it is. Maybe you've always wanted to pick up painting. We'll go get some paintbrushes and go take a class at the community center and learn something about painting. Maybe you love working with flowers, and so go learn something about flowers. Maybe your kids are always at your house at Christmas time on their cell phones, and you're like, what in the world are they doing? And you decide, this is the year I'm going to learn something about the internet. I laugh, and my dad is, he's getting up there in age, and we always politely harass my mom about technology. We bought her YouTube a couple years ago, and it's free, but she thought we bought it for her because we put it on her iPad. And she's like, did you get me the YouTubes? Like, yes, we got you the YouTubes, Mom, so that you could watch the sermons and stuff when she was gone. And we try to, it's like, look at those old people, I can't believe it. But my dad is a computer programmer. That's one of the things that's like, all right, well, computers maybe not as new as we think they are. My dad was one of those computer programmers back in the 80s, worked with computers back in the 70s. I mean, we had a stack of punch cards in our garage when I was a kid. He's like, that's a computer program. I'm like, they're punch cards, Dad. He's like, yeah. I mean, that technology that we use today, it was built by that generation that was growing up, that baby boomer generation. Well, you know what? If you don't grasp it and know it, you can learn it. There's somebody that wants to teach you how to do that so that you could watch your grandkids' games so that they're playing wherever they are. Mom and Dad film it and put it up there so that you can get on a video conference call and actually talk to them face to face. It's like Dick Tracy. We're in the future, all right? You can learn those things. You can do those things. Find something. Keep learning and keep teaching. At the Christmas Eve service, one of the things I love about being there, there's a gentleman that comes to every single one of our Tuesday Bible studies that we do. And this gentleman has lived and done so many things. And he fought in wars. He's traveled around the world. He was an engineer, and so Tate interviewed him once to do a project for his engineering class he has at school. And he was that veteran, and John was there, and John's a vet. And I was like, hey, John, let me introduce you to Neil. And I did that, and Abby came over to me and said, why'd you do that? We're never leaving. And like 30 minutes later, John's still over there talking to Neil and having a great time, because Neil wants to pass on what he had to anybody that'll listen. And you know what? There's people all over the place in this town that would love just to sit down with you and pass on that knowledge, pass on their wisdom, tell you about what life was like when they were growing up and how we could use that in life today. If we want our young people not to waste their youth, the best thing that we can do is sit them down with somebody that has some life experience and say, this is what I did, and I wish I had done this when I was your age. And how great is that to pass on? Keep learning. Keep teaching. You're never too old to start learning something new. But he doesn't stop there. Verse 12 of chapter 12 was actually one of our favorite verses in college, all right? I had a professor that used this as his very first lesson in one of the classes that we took when I took a systematic theology class. Ecclesiastes 12:12. It says, but my child, let me give you some further advice. Be careful, for writing books is endless, and much study wears you out. You know what Solomon's trying to say? Always learn, always teach. But don't only do that. Don't only learn and teach. Because if all you do is just dive into a book, guess what? It says right there, the writings of books is endless. There's going to be another book for you to read, and another book for you to read, and another book for you to read, and another book for you to read. There's going to be another thing for you to do. And he says, honestly, at some point in time, it wearies the body. It wearies the soul. We learn. Why? Not so that we can become hermits and stay in our little closed area where we learn. We learn so that we can be better people out in the world that God's given us. Learn something new, teach something new every single day, but don't just learn and teach. Interact. Be involved. Look at this past decade and say, what have I done this past decade? How have I made an impact in my community, in my church, in my family? What have I done? And then look forward into the future and say, what am I going to do in 2020? What am I going to do in the 20s? What am I going to do in the decade that's coming up? Because you can learn everything you could learn, and you can teach everything you could teach, but until you get out there and do something, everything that's happening is just here. And you're missing out on the world that God's given you. Never learn just to learn. There are too many things and never enough time. Never learn just to learn. Learn to do something with it. I mean, sure, go learn philosophy if that's what you want to do, but then go make the world better. Teach somebody, inspire somebody. Don't just learn about paintings. The boys and I, we went to the Guggenheim the other day, and we saw lots of paintings. Lots of these very exquisite and ornate things that were being done. Don't just learn about it. Try it. Do it. There was a guy that has an entire gallery in the Guggenheim where he painted white rectangles. That's the best I could describe it. We walked in and it was just rectangles and they were white. That guy did it. That guy's living the dream, all right? You and I have always thought, boy, I could never be an artist. That guy, white paper and a canvas. I don't even know if he put paint on it. I have no idea, but he's living the dream. They had a t-shirt in there that said something like, people always walk into museums and say, I could do that, but you didn't. I'm like, okay, maybe. I've done that. I've done a white canvas before. I've got some in the garage that I've never opened up. They're there. They're just as white as those are. But do it. Maybe you are the next person. Maybe you could do gray rectangles or blue rectangles. I don't know. There was a guy that did a red rectangle, so that's off the table, all right? You cannot be famous for the red rectangle. But whatever. Go do something. Learn to play an instrument. Go get excited about it. Never learn just to say I have the knowledge just so I can compete on Jeopardy. Learn to go do something with it. Change the world. Make it better. Maybe just your world. Maybe just the place where you fellowship and socialize. But learn and do, because that ultimately is what he concludes with everything. The last 2 verses of Ecclesiastes says that's the whole story. That's the whole story. Here is now my final conclusion. You want to know his final conclusion? What's the meaning of life? You're looking for it. You've been waiting for it. Here it is. I know they should have put this at the beginning of the Bible, so when you opened it up and read the first verse, you're like, all right, this is what we're looking for. It's a thesis statement. Here's the meaning of life. We know what it is. Here it is. Here's the conclusion. Fear God and obey his commands, for this is everyone's duty. And God will judge us for everything we do, including every secret thing, whether good or bad. What's his conclusion for the whole thing? His whole thing is just love and respect God. And then go out and do good things. Love and respect God. And know that we're going to be judged by the things that we do. Not the things we learn, not the things we taught, but the things that we do. The things that we're a part of. So what are you going to do in 2020? What are you going to do in the years to come? I mean, learn something? Check. Teach something? Check. And do many good things. This is the year of doing many good things. This is the year of saying, okay, I've learned something, God. I've taught something, God. But God, I'm ready to do something. Love God, respect God, and do good things. And what a powerful thing for him to come up with at the end of all things. Something that a little child already knows. Love God, do good things. That's his meaning of life. That's it. That's how he sums it all up. That's the conclusion that he comes to. And this year, that's what we're going to focus on. We're going to focus on what can we do for God this year. You know, I've already told you we're going to be starting in January doing a study, a Bible study called Who's Your One? It's the idea of, can you just look around the world that you populate, the people that are around you? Can you look around there and say, this is one person that I believe I can have an impact on? One person. And intentionally, throughout the year, do good for that one person. Do good for them physically. Do good for them emotionally. But then coming from me as a pastor, do good for them spiritually. Bring the gospel to them. Let them know that there is hope. Let them know that there is faith. Let them know that there is love beyond anything they can imagine inside God. And share that gospel with them. And tell them the truth about who Jesus is and how Jesus loves them. And how you found your meaning in life because you found your meaning in life in that scripture verse we just read. By fearing God and obeying his commands. You found meaning there. You found purpose there. You found love and joy and hope. You found happiness there. By fearing God, obeying his commands, and by doing the good things he's called us to do. This year, let's make that our commitment. We're on our journey still, yes. We have an idea, a vision of reaching the future, of getting to the end of that journey. But on that journey, let's do 1,000 good things. Let's change dozens of lives. Let's be a blessing to people that are hurting. Let's be a joy to people that are sad. Let's mourn with people that are crying, but let's help them find hope in the midst of their sadness. Let's be the people that God's called us to be and do the good things that God has called us to do in the midst of a world that just needs people to share the love of God. And that's our call. That's our call for the year to come. We've been on our journey. We're on our way. And we are solidly doing it. We're getting there. And so while we travel, Let's make it the best trip that we've ever had. Let's make it the best journey we've ever been on. So that when we get to our destination, we're already filled with joy. We're already celebrating because we know we got where we needed to be because God has taught us, because we've learned along the way, but we've also experienced and done the things that God's called us to do. Y'all pray with me.